I had barely stepped out of the Mercy Hill Cancer Center when I got the message from Jeffers' assistant. Mr. Jeffers would like to see you in room 14 the moment you arrive. No greeting, no hope, you're feeling better, just a cold directive, like I was a task overdue for deletion rather than a senior director returning from her 4th round of chemotherapy. They say when you're fighting cancer, your job will wait. Your company will understand. But Sterling Dynamics, tucked away in the heart of Grand Rapids, Michigan, wasn't that kind of place. And Harold Jeffers sure as hell wasn't that kind of boss. I still had on my hospital clothes underneath a wool cardigan, my thinning hair hidden beneath an old baseball cap my daughter gave me last Christmas. There was no time to go home. 10 minutes later, I was at the office, one hand gripping a folder of treatment paperwork, the other clutching the Q4 strategy plan I'd pieced together during nights when the pain kept me from sleeping. I'd poured everything I had left into it, thinking, hoping that maybe they'd remember what real value looked like. The 8th floor was quieter than usual, unnaturally so. No one greeted me. Eyes darted away. It was like I was a ghost in the very place where I'd led a team through 3 consecutive record-breaking quarters. As I walked past the desks, I noticed the company handbook I designed for new hires tossed aside, collecting dust. Forgotten just like me. The door to room 14 was already open. Jeffers didn't stand, didn't offer a seat. There was a thick envelope on the table, resting beside a steaming espresso. He didn't even look at me, just checked his watch and spoke, his tone colder than the flickering fluorescent lights above. "Charlotte, thanks for coming. Let me get right to the point." I already knew. I felt it before he even opened his mouth. But not like this. Not today. Not when I had just survived another brutal treatment. Not after 2 decades of giving this company everything. I had a company my late husband and I once dreamed of building together, before cancer stole him too. Still, I nodded, my voice steady, like I had in every boardroom battle. "Of course, I'm ready." What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was ready in more ways than one. And what came next? They never saw it coming. Harold didn't waste a second pretending this was anything but an execution. He pushed the envelope toward me like it was a final bill, his expression void of emotion, polished and professional in that calculated way that told me he'd rehearsed every word, probably in front of a mirror that didn't fight back. "Effective immediately. Your role at Sterling Dynamics is being dissolved," he said, his voice as crisp as the pressed collar on his overpriced shirt. "The board has agreed it's time to realign leadership with a new direction, one better suited to today's demands." I didn't respond at first. I just let the words settle, not because I didn't understand them, but because something inside me had already expected this. Still, hearing it out loud, especially after what I had just come from the IV drip still fresh in my veins, the metallic taste of chemo still lingering on my tongue, it landed like a blow I'd been bracing for, yet couldn't completely absorb. "I'm being fired," I said quietly, not as a question, but as confirmation, as if I needed to hear it from my own lips to make it real. He smiled, not kindly, but with that smug, practiced smirk of someone who enjoys control a little too much. "Let's not make this dramatic, Charlotte. We're parting ways professionally. It's nothing personal." But of course it was personal in every way that matters. No performance review, no acknowledgement of my team's record-breaking quarter, no mention of the fact that I had shown up and delivered even when my body was breaking down from the inside out. Just a cold cut. As if 23 years of loyalty could be folded and filed away like a quarterly report that no longer served its purpose. He stood now, towering over me like a verdict had just been passed. "You've done what you could, and we appreciate your service," he added, though his tone betrayed no real appreciation, only relief, like a man who had finally eliminated a variable he could no longer control. Then came the kicker, the insult, dressed as rationale. "The reality is," he said, slipping into the cadence of corporate spin, "we need leaders who can command with strength, agility, and presence. And with everything you've been dealing with, I think you can agree this role has outgrown you." Outgrown me? That was the phrase he used like I was a worn-out shoe, no longer fashionable, no longer fitting into the future of his rebranded empire. Not a single word about the hundreds of hours I had stayed late to cover for gaps his management created, not a mention of the mentorships I'd built, the systems I'd implemented, or the millions in revenue my team had generated. It wasn't that I didn't lead. It's that I didn't lead his way loudly, arrogantly, aggressively. I led through people, through patience, through trust. And that, to Harold Jeffers, was weakness. I watched him straighten his tie, preparing to move on to the next meeting, the next agenda item. Your access will be cut by 5 p.m., he said. It is already handling the shutdown. Please return your badge and laptop to HR before you leave. There was a long silence, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I had learned long ago that the most powerful response isn't fury, it's composure. So I stood, adjusted the sleeves of my cardigan, and extended my hand. Thank you for the clarity, I said calmly, my voice steady. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because I had no intention of giving this man anything else he could take. He hesitated, then shook it more from obligation than respect, and mumbled, "Good luck, Charlotte." I left the room not in defeat, but in quiet reflection. My mind already rewinding the decades I had poured into this company, from my first days stuffing trade show brochures in a supply closet to leading strategic deals that had once saved us from collapse. I had built too much to be dismissed like an outdated memo. As I walked past the glass walls of departments I had once overseen, no one made eye contact. My name had already become uncomfortable to speak, as though acknowledging what happened to me might mean it could happen to them. That's the thing about workplaces built on fear. They hollow people out before they ever fire them. But deep inside, beneath the ache and exhaustion, a steady pulse of something else stirred. Not revenge, not yet, but truth. Because what Harold didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the day he pushed me out was the day I walked straight into a far more powerful position, one no title, no corner office, no corporate decree could ever grant. I wasn't just a woman fired during chemo. I was the woman holding the keys to the company. And the next board meeting, that was my meeting. As I stepped out of that sterile glass room with the envelope pressed flat against my palm, I half expected someone from my team to stop me, to say something, to even just offer a look that said, "We see you. This isn't right." But the floor, once so alive with collaboration and inside jokes shared over cold coffee, now felt like a silent museum of betrayal. People I had mentored, defended in boardroom battles, and stayed late to support suddenly found their screens more interesting than the woman who had once fought for their promotions. My name wasn't whispered with reverence or regret. It wasn't whispered at all. It was scrubbed from conversation like a stain no one wanted to acknowledge, like saying it out loud might summon the same fate onto them. I passed Ethan, one of the junior analysts I'd trained myself, and for a moment his eyes met mine not with cruelty, but with discomfort, the kind that sits in your gut when you know something is wrong but you're too afraid to admit it. He gave me the smallest nod before looking back at his screen, and I realized then, silence isn't neutral. It's a decision, and every quiet face I passed made theirs. The hardest part wasn't being fired, it was being erased. The break room, once a noisy hub of late-night laughter and exhausted high-fives, had its blinds drawn. No one offered a hug. No one asked if I was okay. Even Margaret, who used to sneak me ginger tea during my treatments, kept her distance, fiddling nervously with her stapler as if a cancer diagnosis were contagious or standing near me might put her on some invisible list. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised. Sterling dynamics had changed long before that moment. Ever since Harold Jeffers rose through the ranks like a vine choking the roots my husband and I once nurtured together. The culture we built home, rooted in kindness, resilience, and mutual respect, had been paved over by sleek buzzwords and leadership seminars that glorified aggression as vision and efficiency as ethics. Still, watching it play out so personally, it stung deeper than I had imagined. There had been a time when I believed these people would stand beside me through anything. After all, I had been there for them through budget cuts, personal crises, and failed launches we turned into triumphs. But now, all I could hear were keyboards tapping and forced small talk, as if my presence threatened to collapse the fragile illusion that everything here still had meaning. By the time I reached my office, the one I had earned through sweat, patience, and an unwillingness to play politics, I found a cardboard box waiting near the door, HR's gentle way of saying, "Don't linger." I stepped inside one last time, letting my fingers trail over the bookshelves filled with strategy guides, client gifts, and photographs of the team I once considered family. I looked at the framed snapshot of my husband and me standing in front of the old Sterling factory, both of us grinning like fools on our first day of operations, back when the company still fit into a single converted warehouse and every person knew every other by name. And now, 23 years later, I was leaving through the back door like an afterthought. But the thing is, I didn't cry. Not then. Not because I wasn't hurt, I was, but because somewhere between the sterile dismissal and the hollow stares, something inside me stopped breaking and started hardening. I realized that no matter how much you give, no matter how much you believe in building things the right way, there will always be those who value polish over principle and replace legacy with illusion. They thought they had taken everything. They thought they'd silence me with a handshake and a severance letter. What they didn't know was that I wasn't walking out empty-handed. I was walking out with history, with truth, and with something far more potent than position or paycheck. I was walking out with the leverage to take it all back. I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors or tear up the severance papers like some indignant character in a made-for-TV drama. I simply walked out of that office, box in hand, dignity intact, and heart bruised but not broken, carrying with me more than anyone around me could see. What Jeffers believed was the end of my story was, in fact, the very moment my father's plan quietly stepped into motion. That night, the apartment felt unusually still. I didn't turn on the TV or check my email. Instead, I sat by the window overlooking the quiet stretch of Monroe Avenue, the streetlights casting long shadows that flickered across the floor like ghosts of choices past. I stared at the photo I had placed on the kitchen counter, the same one that had always sat on my office desk. My father, Graham Ellison, beaming as he stood in front of the first building of Ellison Systems, back when the company was just a wild idea and a handful of used computers in a rented garage. He had that look in his eyes, the one that always said, "We're not here to follow. We're here to build something that matters." My fingers traced the edge of the frame, and I could almost hear his voice again, warm, steady, stubborn in the best way. He used to tell me, "You won't always be the loudest in the room, Charlotte, but when your moment comes, you'll make sure the whole room hears you." At the time, I didn't know what he meant. Now, I understood. The next morning, while the world continued spinning like nothing had changed, I met with someone who had been a part of our family's story far longer than Jeffers had even heard the company's name, Mr. Vernon Hart, my father's longtime attorney. His office, tucked in the upper floor of an old sandstone building off Ottawa Street, still smelled like worn leather and pine-scented floor polish. He welcomed me with the kind of calm reserved for people who already know how the story ends. He didn't say much. He just handed me a sealed envelope, heavy, thick, embossed with my father's initials, and waited. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the wax seal, revealing a letter written in my father's unmistakable hand, the loops and flourishes as familiar as his laugh. The opening line took my breath away. "If you're reading this, Charlotte, it means the world has finally shown you its teeth. And now, it's time you show it your backbone." As I continued reading, the world fell away. He spoke of watching me grow not just into a capable businesswoman, but into a leader forged in fire, shaped not by privilege but by persistence. He acknowledged the sacrifices I had made, the strength I had shown in silence, the integrity I had refused to compromise even when it would have been easier to fold. He wrote about legacy not as something passed down, but something earned, and how he had always believed I would know when the time was right to claim it. And then, tucked behind the letter, was the legal document that made the blood in my veins turn Electrica Trust Agreement, dated years ago, transferring 90% ownership of Ellison Systems to me, effective on my 50th birthday, the one I had just quietly celebrated while hooked to a chemo drip. I stared at the paper, reading it again and again, half expecting it to vanish if I blinked. "Is this real?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Vernon nodded. "It's not only real. Charlotte Tight's legally untouchable. Your father wanted you to see the company for what it had become before you decided what it could be again. He trusted that when the time came, you would know exactly what to do." That trust, that weight, it settled on me like armor. My years of loyalty hadn't been wasted. They had been a crucible. Every dismissal, every slight, every ignored contribution, they were tests, designed not to break me, but to reveal who deserved to stand beside me when I rose again. I didn't rush to expose the truth. I didn't call the board or draft a fiery press release. Instead, I spent the following days preparing, quietly and precisely, just as my father had prepared this moment for me. I reviewed financials, collected evidence, gathered testimonials from staff who had suffered under Jeffers' regime. I sat with Vernon in long strategy sessions, planned every step, every word, every document I would need to turn the tables without ever raising my voice. Because power doesn't need to shout. And when the moment came when the boardroom doors opened and the same men who had once dismissed me prepared for yet another routine meeting, they had no idea the woman they had discarded was about to take her rightful place at the head of the table. They didn't know that the silence I walked away with had been filled not with defeat, but with the legacy no one could take from me. The morning of the meeting arrived like a storm I'd been watching build for weeks, and yet I felt calm, strangely, almost peacefully so. I dressed with intention, choosing the navy suit I had kept tucked away for years, the one I'd never worn because I told myself it was for an occasion that mattered. Today, it did. Every thread felt like a stitch in the long tapestry of battles I'd endured quietly. Every fiber a reminder that resilience, like fabric, is often woven tighter in darkness. Outside, the air over Grand Rapids was cold and still, the kind of air that carries memory in its silence. I didn't rush. I walked into the Ellison Systems building not like a returning employee, but like someone coming home after a long exile, holding a truth too powerful to remain hidden much longer. The receptionist did a double take, but didn't stop me. She must have heard rumors people always do when power begins to shift in unseen ways. Vernon Hart, ever the steady hand behind my quiet ascent, met me by the elevators, his leather briefcase in one hand and a calm smile in the other. "They're all in," he said softly. "Jeffers thinks he's about to deliver a quarterly roadmap. He has no idea." I nodded, smoothing my sleeve, my heart steady, not with pride, but with purpose. The boardroom door opened with a soft click, but the impact felt seismic. I stepped inside just as Harold was gesturing at a digital slide, mid-sentence, his voice full of that same polished authority I'd once mistook for strength. His words faltered the moment he saw me, his brow tightening, his posture stiffening like a man caught off guard on ground he thought he owned. "Charlotte," he said, the name almost sour in his mouth. "This meeting is for board members only." I walked to the head of the table without slowing, placing 2 folders in front of my C-tone legal, 1 personal. "Exactly," I replied evenly. "That's why I'm here." Silence rippled across the room, not chaotic, but stunned, curious eyes darting between me and the chair I now claimed as mine. Harold stepped forward, confused, but trying to maintain control. "You're no longer with the company," he insisted, his voice tinged with panic he couldn't quite hide. "You don't belong in this room." I looked up, not defiant, but assured. "I'm not here as an employee, Harold. I'm here as the majority shareholder." Gasps didn't erupt, but the energy shifted sharply. Men who had known my father leaned in, their eyes narrowing with interest rather than skepticism. I opened the first folder and slid the notarized trust papers across the table toward Mr. Landry, one of the oldest board members and someone who had stood beside my father when Ellison Systems was just a startup struggling to meet payroll. These documents show that 90% of Ellison Systems shares were transferred to me in trust by my father Graham Ellison effective on my 50th birthday. I said, my voice calm but firm, as though I had said these words 100 times in the quiet of preparation. "That date has passed. I now hold full voting rights." Landry adjusted his glasses, reading with care, then slowly nodded. "It's legitimate," he said, his voice weighted with both surprise and approval. "Every signature matches. Every clause checks out." Harold laughed nervously, the sound brittle. "This is absurd," he snapped. "Why would Graham do that? You hadn't earned." "Because he knew what this company needed wasn't noise," I interrupted, not raising my voice but letting my conviction do the cutting. "He knew leadership wasn't measured in volume but in values, and he watched quietly from afar as you dismantled the heart of what he built." I opened the second folder. "As the majority shareholder, I've called this meeting to review executive leadership, starting with the CEO." Harold's face drained of color. "This is a coup," he spat. "A personal vendetta. This is accountability," I said, laying out the report I had compiled over the last several weeks' employee satisfaction metrics, revenue stagnation, high turnover rates, and a disturbing pattern of HR complaints that had been quietly buried during his tenure. "These aren't feelings, Harold. They're facts. And facts have a way of surviving spin." He looked around the table, desperate for support, but found only discomfort and silence. Even the ones who had once nodded at his every word now seemed unwilling to lift their gaze. When a leader falls, they often learn how little of their power was truly theirs. "I'm submitting a motion to remove Harold Jeffers as CEO of Ellison Systems," I declared, locking eyes with the man who had once dismissed me without a second thought. With 90% of the vote, the motion carries. There was a pause, short, silent, almost sacred, and then Mr. Landry nodded again. Motion approved. Effective immediately. Harold's chair scraped the floor as he stood, anger flaring in his eyes, but the fire was hollow. He gathered his things with a shake of the head and left the room without a word, not because he accepted defeat, but because for the first time in his career, he was powerless to stop it. I turned to the board, steady but not gloating. Ellison Systems deserves better. Its people deserve better. Starting today, that's what we'll give them. And just like that, I reclaimed not just my place at the table, but the soul of a company that had nearly forgotten its own heartbeat. In the days that followed Harold Jeffers' removal, the air inside Ellison Systems began to shift subtly at first, like the scent of rain before a long-awaited storm breaks open the heat. It wasn't loud or sudden. There was no grand parade or announcement blaring through the halls. But in every quiet corner of the building, something began to return, something that had long been missing, buried under years of fear-driven leadership and sterile corporate jargon. On Monday morning, I stood in the main hall, not as the shadow of a forgotten executive, but as the rightful steward of a company that had once stood for more than quarterly margins. Employees trickled in, many wearing the same guarded expressions I had seen on my way out just weeks before, expressions carved from burnout, doubt, and silent resignation. I stood alone at the front, no script in hand, no marketing team rehearsing optics behind the scenes, just me, Charlotte Ellison, telling the truth. "I know some of you remember me," I began, my voice steady but warm, "and some only know what you've heard. But I'm not here to take credit, and I'm not here to reclaim a title. I'm here to restore something we lost along the way, something my father believed in deeply: our people." There were no applause cues, no forced energy, just a growing stillness, the kind that means people are actually listening. I spoke of the values we once held: integrity, transparency, collaboration, not as nostalgic ideals, but as tangible cornerstones of our future. I acknowledged the silence, the fear, the exhaustion that had grown in the absence of trust. I told them about the severance envelope, the blinds drawn in the break room, the eyes that couldn't meet mine, and I told them that none of it was their fault. Then I shared the truth, the legacy my father left behind, the trust he placed in me, the vote that turned the tide. I didn't wield it like a weapon. I offered it like a promise. In the weeks that followed, I didn't just make executive changes, I rewrote the blueprint. I reinstated Kevin from product development, the one who had once left in quiet protest after Jeffers dismissed his entire team without warning. I promoted Maya from customer service to director of client experience, not because she had the flashiest resume, but because for years she had been the emotional backbone of our support floor, holding both clients and colleagues together through crises without ever asking for recognition. I met with every department, not in boardrooms, but in their own spaces, where the real work happened. I asked questions, and I listened without agenda. I dismantled the old HR structure that had become a tool of fear, replacing it with a people-first initiative focused on transparency, career growth, and psychological safety. Slowly, then all at once, the company began to breathe again. Desks, once stripped of personality, started sprouting photos of families, coffee mugs from vacations, and the occasional sticky note with a quote or a joke. Laughter returned, not the nervous performative kind, but the genuine sound of people remembering they mattered. One afternoon, I passed the break room and saw a whiteboard message left in marker. She came back. Not she won, not she got even. Just she came back. That hit deeper than any title ever could. A year later, I stood by the same glass doors I had once exited with a box of belongings and the taste of betrayal in my mouth. The building behind me wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Revenue was up, yes, but more importantly, so was retention, morale, and trust. We had rebuilt Ellison Systems, not as a monument to any one person's ego, but as a living testament to what happens when people are seen, valued, and believed in. And every time I walked past my father's portrait, now restored to its place of honor behind my desk, I smile not with vengeance, but with gratitude. We didn't just fix a company, We made it human again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own worth, your quiet strength, or the injustice you once survived, share it. Someone else might need to hear it today. And if you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or pushed aside, remember, your value doesn't vanish when others fail to see it. 2. Subscribe to the Underdog's Revenge for more true stories of resilience, justice, and the courage to come back stronger than ever.